teachers. Today we're talking about the Haydn German dance in D major that sounds like this. Of course, there's 8 more measures to that, but it's a nice, short, and sweet piece. This is on RCM level 1, and for my Illinois colleagues, this is on our AIM level 4. I love these German dances. There's a whole set of these. It's worth noting in this Hoboken set 22. There are multiple ones. Today I am looking at this in Jane McGraw's Classics Alive Book 1 book, and on the opposite side of the page she has the E major one, which sounds like this. Very similarly leveled, very similar in character. So if your student likes one of these, it's worth exploring another one because they're pretty quick to learn and just fun to play if your student likes this kind of style. Now, German dances, it's a pretty basic name. It's not as refined and graceful perhaps as the minuet, which came before it. It's related more closely, I think, to the Ländler and the waltz, which comes after this. More of a peasant country dance kind of feel. Haydn wrote many of these, as I already said. Beethoven wrote several German dances, and I think these are really good preparation for some early Beethoven. Beethoven didn't really write anything that's easy, right? We all know that. And while this looks short and simple, there are some things that are a little bit tricky that we do have to work on with our students. The biggest one would just be understanding the key signature that we're in and knowing the chords, because Haydn likes to jump around to lots of different chords. So for this one that we're talking about today, we're in D major. And so you want your students to know their D major tonic triad, and then that the dominant chord is A major. And then this is a great opportunity to work on understanding a dominant 7th chord. What the major chord with the minor 7th together make that dominant 7th chord. And I don't expect my students to remember this the first few times we cover it, but we do oftentimes omit either the 3rd, that C sharp, or the 5th, in this case the E, or both the C sharp and the E, the 3rd and the 5th, and just play the 7th. And that's exactly what you get in this piece, both in measure 7 and then in measure 15. So measure 5, left hand, go down to that 7th on A. That's really just the dominant 7th chord without all those close tied together, 3rd and 5th in there. It's just the open 7th. So I do like to use pieces like this as an exploration of what are the chords in the tonic key. Now, if you want to get pretty technical, there's also a secondary dominant in this piece, in measure 10. We go to A, and then you have the little E7. I can't imagine with any student at this level, especially a child playing this, like an elementary school student, I can't imagine going into depth talking about a secondary dominant. But perhaps if you're teaching this to an adult who really enjoys theory, or a student for whom piano is their second instrument and they're working on theory, you could certainly dive into the idea of a secondary dominant there, and that E7 chord is borrowed from the key of A. All right, so with those chords, we do have quite a few jumps, and you're going to want to practice your left hand from here to here to here, and then to finish on the 3rd on D. And then in addition to that, going either from measure 8 into 9 or from the end back to measure 9 on the repeat, students need to be ready to practice that jump back up to the A major chord. This is made harder by the fact that the right hand plays this octave in measure 8. And then it has a big jump. So I wouldn't try to tackle that jump hands together first. I would certainly work on that hand separate. If you can get your student to think of that lower D just as a nice little springboard that's setting them up to go all the way to the A, then that can work really well. They don't want to accent that last note because it's the end of a phrase, so you do want to pull back from that. You don't want to go whack and then jump to the A. So it should be gentle. you could experiment with doing something like it's a big circle and jumping up. I'm sure you have ideas on how to do this, but it's worth noting that with any binary dance like this that has a shift on the repeat or on the movement to the B section, you have to work on this with your students because they will naturally just finish that measure, stop, and then take their time to get to the next one. And it should flow relatively in tempo, although a tiny little breath, of course, is also appropriate. Okay, we have an appoggiatura in this piece. In this edition, measure 7 and measure 15 are marked as an appoggiatura D eighth note before the downbeat C sharp. And that should just be played as 2 eighth notes. So pick up into 7. And Jane McGraw has marked that in the bottom of this edition as helping you realize that ornament. Now I've seen this in other editions where they just write it as eighth notes. So those editors are helping the student just know this is how you execute an appoggiatura. But if you're confused about appoggiaturas, I'd love for you to check out my other video about basic ornamentation, and I will link that in the description below. Articulation is one of the best ways to be expressive in these early dances, and in this edition it's entirely marked, so there's no mystery as to what you're supposed to do. Lots of staccatos and then slurs over the eighth notes, including that ending kind of 2-note slur feel. So not difficult. Also, it's not super difficult because most of the time the right hand and the left hand in this piece do match up. However, when you get to those right hand slurs, the left hand does have to keep bouncing. So if I play measure 9, they bounce together, and then the right hand's going to play legato. This is something that students have to work on. You can attack this in something really basic like a 5-finger pattern where you play one hand staccato and the other hand legato, such as in an A major, since we're in A here. You might notice that I was bouncing my left hand very high, much higher than I actually needed to in order to create staccato. That's because I find that with my students, exaggerating articulation helps their brains to sort out exactly what their hands are supposed to be doing. So you could do something very simple like a 5-finger pattern or any other pattern that they already know how to play with that technique, and then apply it to this particular situation. Again, I just bounced my left hand extra high to help my brain sort out what am I supposed to do in my 2 different hands with that articulation. The last thing I'd want my students to work on in this piece would be keeping a steady tempo. It's a dance. And I always make it a point whenever my students are doing any dance, a minuet, an allemande, a courant, a German dance, something that's even much more current and popular that is a dance tune, that you frankly have to keep a steady tempo or else the poor dancers will not know how to move and they'll get stuck in their feet. So as we already mentioned, moving between the sections is an important point to practice with your students to keep that steady tempo, but throughout the entire piece, they need to be feeling 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And since this is related to the waltz that comes later, most dances, in fact, in 3/4 time, do have that emphasis on beat 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so you do get a little bit more of a lilt if you feel that and if you keep the tempo steady. I hope this has given you a few ideas on how to teach one of these earlier German dances by Haydn. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel and share it with your piano teacher friends. Best wishes in all of your teaching.